Good morning, everybody. This is John Selleck from Harbor Strategic. We're here today to talk about Senate Bill 103. It was passed by the legislature last week. It's over sitting on Governor Whitmer's desk right now. And as you know, the Constitution allows 14 days for a governor to decide whether to sign or veto a bill. And you're going to hear from two organizations today that think strongly that the governor should veto Senate Bill 103. And I'll let them go into the details as to why, but we know in a nutshell that what that legislation does is remove competition that's federally mandated currently and put a new state law in place that would say that there's essentially a monopoly on constructing and operating Michigan's electric grid going into the future. Now, it's bad for a lot of reasons, but one big reason is that when you eliminate competition, you generally see higher prices. We don't need an economics degree to understand that. And if you spent any time today looking on CNBC or Fox News or anything else, or on your Twitter account, you're going to see that the inflationary data was released for the month today. And what we saw was a 6.8% increase in inflation on costs for people, from Michigan families, businesses, year over year, from this last November to the year ago November. And that amounts to the highest inflationary increase in nearly 40 years. So Michigan families, businesses, they're already facing high price increase pressures. It's just another reason that these two organizations will talk about why it's such a head scratcher that we would move to eliminate competition and move to a monopoly system that will just probably serve to raise electricity prices in the long run. And while we hope inflation is temporary because of the pandemic, Janet Yellen just said a few days ago that we should stop talking about inflation like it's temporary. It's something that's going to be here to stay. So you don't want to hear from me anymore. I want to introduce you to our two experts. We'll have them speak one after the other, and then we'll take all the questions that you have. All you'll need to do is raise your hand virtually, and we'll get to the questions as soon as we're done with the remarks. We're hoping to get in and out in about 30 minutes, so we'll hopefully get to your questions as soon as we can. First, we're going to have John Dulmus from the Michigan Chemistry Council, and then we'll hear from Jason Hayes at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. So with that, let me turn it over to John Dulmus. Go ahead, John.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for your time this morning to learn about this important issue, and I hope to share our perspective. My name is John Dulmus. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Chemistry Council, or the MCC. The MCC is the voice for Michigan's business of chemistry, which is one of our state's largest and most important manufacturing sectors. It's important because 96% of all other manufactured goods are directly touched by the business of chemistry. Our industry helps enable medicines, agriculture, construction, electronics, energy, and aerospace and automotive, including, yes, batteries and electric vehicles, for those who are paying attention. But the Michigan Chemistry Council is extremely concerned with this legislation, SB 103, that would eliminate competition for electric transmission development. Energy costs are a huge issue for our industry, and our members here have long been burdened by Michigan's high electricity rates. We've been working on these issues for years. We're glad that the reality is finally being recognized. But now we are urging our policymakers to truly get serious about competitive energy policies, and especially the needs of ratepayers in our state. Our industrial electric rates are about 30% higher than states like Tennessee, Kentucky, and Louisiana, states that have been taking a huge share of investment by our industry in particular. That's something we want to change. Our residential rates for the employees of our companies, for anyone who lives in our states, are the 10th highest in the nation, behind only Alaska, Hawaii, California, and the New England states. This is frankly shameful. This is why we're calling upon Governor Whitmer to help address the situation, to veto this legislation, and to send it back to the legislature for further work to achieve real solutions and to protect ratepayers from increases in these costs. This legislation, unfortunately, was sold to the House and Senate as a solution to a problem, but in our view, it would only create additional problems and higher costs for ratepayers. As John alluded to, it defies all the literature, all experience, and all common sense not to expect that projects with guaranteed rates of return will come in more expensive and with less innovation under a monopoly system. Our members regularly tell me they don't like being captive to monopolies for key services where competition is otherwise possible. I don't like monopolies. I don't even like monopoly of the game, to be honest with you. But in this situation, we have a very strong record of competition being an important part of this. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, and the U.S. Department of Justice have each weighed in, saying that competition is an important part of achieving efficient and cost-effective energy solutions. And just to cite them, the DOJ has stated in federal court that specifically with transmission, competition can reduce costs allocated across consumers in a region, enhance reliability, and improve access to lower cost generation, resulting in lower consumer prices for electricity. Again, that's a very important goal and priority for us. And in contrast, with regard to legislation like this, the DOJ also said that as a result of less competition, the incentives to identify new transmission projects to develop high quality, low cost proposals is reduced. It's a lot easier to put forward something that is not going to be in the best interest of ratepayers if there's no competition for that project. And laws like Senate Bill 103 appear to impose a substantial burden on interstate commerce. And they say that it's not apparent that there's any purported local benefits that could not be achieved with reasonable alternative policy. We think that we have a tremendously qualified Michigan Public Service Commission that overall does a great job in reviewing these kinds of issues. We also have, again, a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, that is looking comprehensively as we speak at transmission issues. That's why it's a head scratcher to us why the state of Michigan would go forward with a policy like this at this time. Transmission is truly a federal issue. We ultimately believe we should leave it at that level, not pass state laws that will nullify the benefits of federal improvements now and into the future, and unfortunately risk potential litigation if there's federal state conflicts. Michigan will be at odds with the federal rules and our regional processes for developing transmission, and ultimately it's going to be a higher cost for ratepayers. That's why, again, we're asking Governor Whitmer to help out businesses, help out residents, and veto this legislation. So, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, John. My name is Jason Hayes with the Mackinac. I'm the Director of Environmental Policy with the Mackinac Center. And the Mackinac Center is a Michigan-based and Michigan-focused nonprofit research center and educational institute that advances the principles of free markets and limited government. We oppose this bill because it unnecessarily shelters incumbent transmission companies in the state of Michigan. So it does this by granting them the right of first refusal, or ROFR, to construct, own, operate, maintain, and control transmission lines, so long as they're included in the transmission operator's approved plan, and the transmission operator is the designated owner of the line, or if the line will connect to their other facilities. The bill limits the competitive pressures that would otherwise reduce prices and encourage innovation across the state of Michigan. So the argument against competitive bidding and the construction, operation, and maintenance of high voltage transmission lines centers on the notion that transmission is a natural monopoly. But that argument can only be correctly applied when there is more than one company building separate and competing transmission infrastructure. So as a April 2019 report produced by the Brattle Group for LSP Transmission Holdings indicated, it's possible to reduce costs and increase efficiencies by having companies compete for the right to construct or maintain portions of the same transmission system. The logic behind this already holds in transportation, with construction firms competing for contracts to build and maintain highways. So the Brattle report rightly notes that subjecting more transmission investments to competition would stimulate innovation, increase the cost effectiveness of these investments, and provide greater overall benefits to customers, which is ratepayers across the state of Michigan. Furthermore, one of the companies that currently enjoys monopoly status in the state of Michigan, they actually state on their website that they participate in competitive bidding processes in other states. So the Brattle report then also describes how competitive bidding in other jurisdictions has led to lower prices for new transmission projects. And based on its findings in a mix of completed and ongoing competitive bidding projects across North America, the UK, and Brazil, Brattle estimates that expanding competitive bidding in this area could save utility customers as much as 30% or $8 billion over a 5-year period. So there was another report that was released by Concentric Energy Advisors that argued several key but flawed points in an attempt to rebut the Brattle report. First, they argued that although many of the competitively bid projects that were reviewed in the Brattle report have cost caps. Several have not reported final costs. So it's too soon, they say, to make any predictions about final costs. But the Brattle report recognized this fact and cautioned readers to remember that cost increases were still possible. And they described the typical causes for those price increases, such as changes in approved routes, but price increases that are caused by those factors would fall just as heavily on projects completed by monopoly transmission owners. And for that reason, the Brattle's initial findings can still represent a good guidepost for us. The Concentric report also critiqued the Brattle findings on both the upper and lower bounds of predicted cost savings. They noted that incumbent transmission owners typically see, quote, fairly modest cost changes of between -2.9% and +7% of overall project costs. But if that's true, it's not an argument against competitive bidding. Rather, it should indicate to Michigan's legislature and to the governor that incumbents would be well prepared to submit an effective bid in the bidding process. So Concentric then moved on to argue that transmission solicitations are both time and resource intensive. The Brattle report effectively addresses this concern by demonstrating that competing transmission operators are capable of managing the complexities of operating in new markets. In the examples Brattle reviewed, outside bidders produced high quality proposals that took into account key policies such as climate and weather, field and soil conditions, and they still came in at 15% below initial regional cost estimates. Brattle also noted that the costs associated with the bidding process are typically recovered as they're borne by the companies taking part in the competitions. So Michigan's own history with competitive processes in electricity provision is clear. From 2002 to 2008, during the time when the Customer Choice and Electric Reliability Act of its Public Act 141 of 2000 was in effect, competitive pressures allowed Michigan ratepayers to enjoy lower electricity rates without a reduction in service quality. There's no reason to expect any different outcomes from competition in the development and the operations of transmission services. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the other John to start off questions.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, John. We have several reporters online. If there are any questions right now, please just raise your virtual hand and I'll put you into the panelist room. Oh, sorry. We have a question from Lindsay Moore of MLive. Lindsay, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It was mentioned that this was presented in the legislature as a solution, and looking at the roll call, it looks like there was overwhelming support in both House and Senate. My question is if any of these concerns were brought up to lawmakers throughout the legislative process, and if you had those conversations, I'm interested to know with whom and what the reaction was as this bill was being formed and discussed.
Yeah, I can take a first shot at that, and then maybe Jason will have his opinion as well. I mean, we've seen before that energy, like others, is a pretty complicated issue, and it's fairly easy for legislators to be convinced that there's going to be a problem if we don't do something. And usually that something means giving a benefit to a monopoly provider, giving a special deal, or protecting them from their competition. It's a pattern we've seen in the past. And in this case, we're told that we're not going to have enough transmission that's built if we don't pass this law. If there's too much competition, we won't have transmission built, which frankly is, I think, an unreasonable and ill-founded argument. There will be transmission built. We've supported more transmission as an organization. We think it's something that's important for our state to have more grid connection. But we know that if we're going to build it, we need to do it the best way possible for the benefit of ratepayers. And so, unfortunately, it was something that, especially in the House, there was not a lot of time to to talk to legislators about it. It moved through in about 2 weeks. You did see on the board pretty significant no votes, despite all that, from both Republicans and Democrats. And we think, again, certainly with all the issues that are out there, we know the governor has a lot of good people advising her on energy. We think they're going to see some of the same concerns that we've had with this, and we hope that as a result, she vetoes it.
Again, picking up on what John has said, we at the Mackinac Center, we did attempt to connect with legislators, but like John said, it did move through pretty quickly through the House. We did have a chance to testify in committee against it. But again, the bigger picture is that the state is trying to go through what they're calling an energy transition. And the reality is that if there is not more transmission built, that transition is going to fail massively. And like John also said, the best way to ensure that we get that transmission built at the best cost and the most quickly is to ensure that we have competitive pressures put against the monopoly providers. I just explained how from 2000 to 2008, the state actually had open competition in terms of generation, not transmission, and prices dropped rapidly when that competitive pressure was put onto the large utilities. And so when they repealed that, again, the legislature repealed that in 2008, and pretty much immediately our prices started going back up. So we went from being below the national average and below the average of adjacent Great Lakes states. And today we're, I believe, 16%, our electricity rates are 16% higher than adjacent Great Lakes states and 13% higher than the national average. So in the past, competitive pressures on monopoly providers, whether in one case it was generation and distribution, in this case it would be transmission. We know that competitive pressures work to reduce costs, and yet the quality of service did not go down. So yeah, again, we did say this to legislators, but things did go through pretty quickly. And so we're taking this opportunity to bring the story back into the public eye again.
Thank you to John Dolmas from the Michigan Chemistry Council and Jason Hayes from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, talking about why Governor Whitmer should veto Senate Bill 103 within the 14-day window that's currently about halfway through. And with that, we'll thank everybody for being on board and have a great day.